Hi everyone, it's Gemma, aka Jam Jar Sews, and I'm really excited today to be partnering with Bombay Stores Fabric to bring you a new exciting sewing project. So Bombay Stores are based up in Bradford. They stock a wide range of all sorts of fun and fabulous fabrics, and they've asked me to come up with a project for Mother's Day. So I thought, what better way to celebrate my lovely mother by making her a new dress to wear on Mother's Day. So I'm going to be making her the Simplicity 1609 pattern. This is a really good pattern for experienced sewers and beginners because it's only made up of two main pattern pieces, but it has these lovely darts in the front and back that give it lots of nice shape. I'm going to be using this lovely batik fabric from Bombay Stores Fabrics, and it's a beautiful cotton batik. It's made with vegan friendly dye. They have a range of colours on the website. I went with this gorgeous purple because it suits my lovely mother's complexion. I think it's going to be really nice to sew with. It's got a nice stability to it, but also it's got a nice lightness to it in terms of its wear. So I think it's going to be really good for her to wear in the summer months. So I'm excited to see it come together. As I said, it's quite a simple pattern, so there's not a lot of fastenings or anything. You just need a 22-inch zip, which Bombay Stores Fabric have also very kindly gifted me in this lovely matching purple. So I'm really excited to get started. The first stage that I always do when I start a new sewing project is I take measurements, because your measurements go up and down and you need to take them to then compare them with the different sizes on the pattern envelope so you know what size to cut, because if you cut the wrong size there's not a lot going back. So that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to take my mum's measurements, we're going to check that against the pattern envelope, and then we're going to cut out the right size pattern pieces, and then I can start cutting out the fabric. And one thing to say as well is that before I cut the fabric, I'll also wash it, because washing fabric is really important before you cut and sew, because it can shrink a little bit in the wash or it can stretch out, and you don't want to cut now and then it's too small when you've made the final garment. So first of all, we do the measurements. So I've taken my measurements so I know which size I need to cut for my mum, and I've also consulted with my lovely client, and she's informed me that she wants me to make version C. So that doesn't have a collar, it doesn't have buttons, it's just a nice plain dress, which I think is quite appropriate for this pattern actually. Now in your pattern envelope, you get a set of instructions and you also get your pieces. So the first thing you're going to want to do is check the instructions to see which pieces you need to cut out for the version that you're making. So for me, because I'm not doing anything with a collar or a bow, I've just got 4 pieces. So I've got the front piece, the back pieces, and then 2 facing pieces as well. So I've cut those out now in the right size using scissors for paper, and now I'm going to pin them to my fabric and I'm going to cut them out with my fabric scissors. Really important that you use separate fabric scissors and paper scissors, because otherwise you'll blunt your fabric scissors. So definitely follow that step. So yeah, I'm going to get started. I always cut on the floor because I don't have a big enough table. Okay, so now I've cut out my pattern pieces from my lovely fabric. The next job is for me to transfer my pattern markings onto the fabric. So on this project I've got notches, which are these small triangles here, and I've also got markings which show me where my darts should start and end, which are little circles on the pattern pieces. So first of all, for the notches, such as on this facing piece, you can either, there's different ways to do it. I tend to either cut a triangle out, or I just do a little snip in like that. And that means that when I come to match the facing pieces to the main garment, I know where they should match, because you can match your notches. For my dart markings, I like to use tailor's tacks. So I use a contrasting thread to the fabric, and basically at the point where I need to sew in my tack, I go through making big loops, making sure I get through both pieces of the fabric, and I make 3 or 4 loops through all of the pieces, and then I just snip that off, and then when I'm done making all of my tacks, I pull off the paper quite carefully so I don't rip it too much, and then the marking will show up on both sides of fabric as a little thread cross, and then when you come to do your darts, that gives you a really good guide of where you need to sew from. Okay, so now we've transferred all of our pattern markings and we've cut out our pattern pieces. I'm now going to start working my way through the instructions. So the first instruction on this pattern is to stay stitch your neckline. So basically I do that on the two front pieces, and that's just to make sure that this nice curve in the neckline stays as it should and it doesn't stretch out whilst you're sewing. So I've done that. And then next it says I need to do my front darts. So each of the front pieces has two darts. We've got one bust dart here, give it the nice shape there. And this dress has got a really nice feature of this, I don't know the technical word, but sort of a cut out dart, which basically when you put it together gives you this really nice curve, which gives a nice shape to the dress. So the first dart I'm going to pin in is the bust dart. So what I'm going to do is I've got these two tailor's tacks here, which note where I should be stitching, and I've got these two notches here. So the objective is I need to fold that over. I need to match those notches first of all. That's my first step. Then I'm going to make sure that the tailor tacks on both sides line up. Put a pin in there. And then I want the fabric to fold down, and this is the point of my dart. So this is where I'm going to sew down to. So want to make sure that's where I'm going to stitch down to there to make my dart. So I'm going to put some more pins in. And then if I turn that out, you can see how the bust dart is going to come together. The next dart I'm going to pin in is this long dart down the side. So again, I've got my tailor's tack here to help guide me. This is going to be the top of the dart. Can be a bit tricky to pin whilst you've got the pins in for the bust dart, but I like to do them all at the same time. So I'm just going to fold that over and get these two raw edges to meet. So that comes down to the edge there. And then if I show you again, you can see that's how it's going to come together to create that nice curve there on your side seam. So for my back piece, I again have two darts. So I've got one at the neckline, which is just a little dart. So again, I've got my notches here at the top. I've got these 2 points which show the line of stitching, and then the peak point of my dart is going to be here. So again, I'm going to fold this over. I'm going to match those notches. Match those tailor's tacks. There was a bit of negotiation involved. So basically I've got 4 tailor's tacks. So I've got one at the bottom, 2 in the middle, and another one at the bottom. So if you look at it in 2D, it forms an almost very slim long diamond. Now to pin this, I fold the fabric like this, so between the 2 end points, and then again I make sure I match up those tailor tacks in the middle on either side. So I'll just pin. And when I'm sewing it, what I'm going to be doing is starting at one point, stitching down to this tailor tack in the middle, and then I'll rotate my needle slightly and I'll go back towards the other point. But I will show you how to do that because I think it's always difficult to explain. But you can see that once that's pinned, that gives you a nice shape again with the curve of the back there. So let's go over to the machine and we can sew these in. So here we are at my sewing machine. This is a sewing machine I got last year when my old one broke. It's a U10 sewing machine and I really like how lightweight and easy to use it is. Some things I like to keep beside me are some little scissors to trim off all my loose threads. These are really handy. And also a good tip I got from Instagram this year was to keep a little pot to keep your loose threads in so they don't all end up on the floor, which is really good. So I'm going to start by at the neckline at the top of the dart, and I'm going to back stitch, and then I'm going to stitch through the tailor's tacks to the point of the dart. It's really important that you don't back stitch at the end of the dart because otherwise you'll end up with a bubble. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut some nice long threads, and then I'm just going to tie a knot at the end of the dart to secure it. So now I'm going to start on the nice long front dart. So I've got my raw edges pinned together and I'm going to start stitching at that tailor's tack at the top of the dart, but I'm not going to back stitch because again I don't want that bubble. So I'm going to leave myself some nice long threads that I can knot. Now that I've finished that dart, and I'm going to move on to the back, starting with the long diamond dart. So I'm going to put that in my machine and put the needle at the top point. Again, I'm not going to back stitch here. When I get to the middle point, I'm going to put my needle in and lift up my presser foot and change the angle that I'm sewing at, and then sew down to that bottom point. Again, we're not going to back stitch at that bottom point. We're going to cut off nice long threads and knot it to avoid getting that bubble in the dart. And now I can show you what it looks like and the lovely curve it puts in the dress. So now I've sewn in all my darts, I'm going to sew my two front pieces together. So this is the nice centre seam that goes down the front. And to do that, you just need to pin the right sides together. And then I'm going to back stitch as always at the beginning and just stitch all the way down that seam. The thing I was slightly unsure of on this dress is the fit on my mum because I've never made it for her before. So to accommodate for this, I decided to use a slightly narrower seam allowance on the front seam and the side seams. And that just means I can get her to try it on and then I can adjust as needed. You'll have to bear with me here because unfortunately I lost my sound recording on the video. But what I'm doing is I'm showing you the facing pieces. So I have one front facing piece and two back facing pieces, and what these do is they add a nice stability to the garment and help it to lie flat as I'm demonstrating here. And because this garment doesn't have any bias binding or other edging on it, this facing will go around the armholes and the neckline to finish it off and encapsulate any raw edges. So I'm showing you my interfacing here. I'm using quite a lightweight interfacing for this as the fabric's already got really nice stability. Once you've ironed your interfacing onto your facing pieces, you're then going to pin them together at the shoulder seams, and you're going to do this before you attach the facing to the dress. So now I've got my facing pieces pinned, I'm going to pin my two back pieces right sides together to my front piece at the shoulder seams. So I'm just sewing the shoulder seams on my facing pieces and my main dress, making sure that I'm only stitching through the shoulder seams and none of the rest of the dress. Now I've sewn my shoulder seams, I'm going to finish them, and to do that I'm going to press them with an iron so that they lay nice and flat, and then introducing my overlocker, which I will be using to finish all my seams on this garment. It's definitely not essential to use an overlocker, but I really like the finish it gives. Now I've finished my shoulder seams, I'm going to pin my facing to my dress. This is our first fiddly bit. So we pin it around the neck hole and around the armholes, and you try and match the shoulder seams where you can. I don't always manage to match everything perfectly, but as long as it fits and lies flat, I don't worry too much. No one's perfect, as I have learnt through many sewing projects. So once that's all pinned, I'm going to take it over to the machine and start sewing. So now that's all pinned, I'm going to stitch the facing onto the dress. This is quite a difficult process, so I like to do it quite slowly and just take my time going around the curves. Again, making sure that you're only stitching through the two pieces of fabric that you want to stitch through and that you're not catching anything else. So I've sewn my facings on now and I've trimmed around the curves. So to do that I've used my pinking shears first of all, just to trim them down, and then I've gone in with my small pair of scissors and I've cut little triangles, little notches. And the reason we do this is because it helps with the curves, it helps them to lie more flat. So then you end up with these sort of like notches all the way around. So I've done that for the neckline and for the armholes. And now comes a fun bit, is I'm going to turn the facing to the inside. It's fiddly. So I'm going to go in through the front. I'm going to reach towards that back piece and I'm going to pull that through the gap between the main dress and the facing. And as I said, it comes through quite easily. Just do it carefully so you don't rip any of your stitching. And once that's come all the way through, we've got nice neat edges. It's a very clever technique, I think. So now I've done that, I'm going to go to my ironing board and I'm going to press all these seams down so they lay nice and flat and beautiful. The other thing you can do when you've got facing like this, or any neckline facing, is you can understitch, which helps to lay nice and flat. With this fabric and the interfacing I've used, I'm actually really happy with the way it's laying at the moment, so I'm not going to understitch it, but that is something you can do. I find pattern instructions aren't always that clear, but there's lots of good video tutorials out there if that is something you want to do for you. So I think any good sewist will tell you that a really important part of making any outfit is pressing. And I like to use my tailor's ham, a very heavy sort of fabric lump that's got sawdust in it, and it's really helpful for pressing out curves, and also really great for when you're pressing in darts, because again they're designed to lie on your body, which has shape in it, rather than to lie on a flat surface. Press this away. So I'm just going to work my way around the curve of the neckline slowly. Take your time when you're pressing, because it makes a really big difference to the finish of the garment. And if, like me, when you were sewing your facing in, you might have had some issues getting everything to line up, this is the step where you can sort of try and modify that and fix that a little bit. So I often as well, when I'm pressing the facing, I'll try and sort of like roll the seam back a little bit so that it's not visible on the front. So you end up with the seam actually lying a little bit towards the inside. I've pressed down all my facing pieces, which I really like this step because it makes the dress look more like a real dress, if you know what I mean. And very, very excited as always by this fabric, it's gorgeous. So next I'm going to top stitch along my armholes. So what that will involve, and it just helps to keep the facing lying nice and flat and so that it doesn't flap around too much. So what that's going to involve is I tend to do it 1 centimetre away from the edge, and I'm just going to do a normal basic running stitch down here on my machine. So I'm going to do that first, and then before I go onto my side seams, I'm also going to finish the edges of my facing, now that's sewn in, with my overlocker. And then once those two things are done, I'm going to start on my side seam. So I'm going to turn the whole dress inside out, so we've got the right sides going together. And it's important when you're doing these side seams that you have your facing flipped up, so you're not stitching down like that, you have it flipped up like this. So when I pin, I'm going to pin from here all the way down my side seam, and I'll sew it in the same way, and then basically when it's sewn together it will come down like that. Okay, so we're back at my machine and I'm going to top stitch my armholes. This is, I should say, this is an optional step. I just like it. I find that it helps keep the facing in place. I'm doing my armhole top stitching. I do start sort of, 3 or 4 centimetres in, because as I said, when I do my side seams I need it to go up like this. So I actually find it easiest to do this by lining up the edge of my presser foot with the edge of the garment. It's going to be visible on the outside of the garment, so we want to make sure it's as neat as possible. So next I'm going to get my overlocker and I'm going to finish these edges. So as I said, I'm going to finish the edge of my facings, and I'll do my other finishing for this with my overlocker. Then I've probably been sewing dresses for about 15 years now, and I only just got this in January, so it's definitely not essential. If you have an overlocker, you can just use your zigzag stitch on your normal machine. And important to be very careful about making sure you're only putting the edge that you're finishing through the overlocker, because you don't want it to accidentally make a hole in your dress. So I'm now pinning my side seams together. So as I said, I flipped the facing up. Because I haven't made this pattern for my mum before, and I'm always a bit cautious about sizing, this dress does use a 5/8 of an inch, 1.5 centimetres seam allowance, but I'm actually going to use something narrower, and then I'm going to get her to try it on, and then I can take it in if I need to. Okay, so now I've done my side seams, which means my front piece is now attached to my 2 back pieces. What I'm going to do is take it to my lovely model, and I just want her to put it on, and obviously the back is still open because our next step is going to be to do the back seam and the zip. but I just want to try it and see, you know, how it fits on her and how it comes together at the back. I've got my mum to try on the dress. The fit is looking really good. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to sew the back seam up to the knot, and then the rest of the back will be fastened with an invisible zip. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the most difficult part of this project, and that's putting in the invisible zip. I've done a fair few invisible zips now in my time, and I do still find them fairly tricky, so but it's just practice. It gets better with practice. I've just put this plain fabric here so I can show you more easily what I'm doing, but that's just a pillowcase, it's not part of the dress. So this dress uses a 22-inch zip, which again Bombay Stores Fabric kindly sent me. So I'm going to unzip the zip. I'm going to start with the left side, and I'm going to align the top of the zip where the teeth end with the top of the neckline, and I'm going to move the facing out the way because basically we want to enclose that edge of that zip tape within the facing. So we'll do that at the next stage. And then what I'm going to do is align the raw edge of the zip tape away from the teeth with the raw edge of the dress. And basically then I'm going to stitch all the way down in this sort of groove here in between where the teeth attach to the zip tape. And what that's going to do is that's going to make the fabric stitch here. So when you close the zip, which I'll show you in a second, it's all nice and invisible. I'm just going to pin all the way down. I always, even though they are designed to be invisible, you know, when people move and wear garments, they do still can occasionally show. So I do always go for a matching colour. I like to pin one side, sew one side. Before I go and sew, I'm just going to show you quickly then how this works. It should then sit kind of meeting this centre line in the zip. But before we sew our invisible zipper, I just want to talk about the different presser feet that you can use to sew zips. So I have 2 feet that I can attach to my machine. I have a regular zip foot and an invisible zip foot. So the regular one is different from your machine's normal presser foot. If you try and use this one, I find that the teeth tend to get stuck in things. It doesn't work very well. So the regular zip foot is quite good because you either attach it on this side or this side, and then you can sew as you need to. And the invisible zip foot I really like. It's got this groove in it which basically feeds the teeth, so it makes it a lot easier to get the needle in the right position. You can sew an invisible zip in with a regular zip foot, but I just find it a lot easier with the invisible zip foot. So to attach that to my machine is very easy. So you want to get it in the right one, so the zip teeth are on the left and the needle is to the right. I put in my needle. I just do that to make sure that I'm in the right place. So I'm just going to sew really slowly, do some back stitches, and all I'm going to do is keep my finger down on the zip teeth to hold them open. As you get to the end, you just want to stitch as close as you can to the zip head. So yeah, really happy with that. I'm going to go back over to the ironing board now, and I'm going to pin the other side, and I'll show you how I do that. Now I've sewn in the left side of my zip, I'm going to do the other side. So I've opened the zip up again, but I take it, I rotate it, so that again the raw edge of the zip tape is aligning with the raw edge of the dress. So it's important to position the top of the zip tape in the same place as you've done on the other side, otherwise you'll have a mismatchy zip. I've sewn in my zip now, both sides, and I'm happy with how that's turned out. And so the next step for me is to sew up this little hole, which basically is between where we sewed up the back seam to this notch earlier and where we put the zip in. I do find this part quite tricky because you basically want a line of stitching that's going to match up with where you've sewn up to the notch here and match up to where you've sewn the invisible zip to here. I also always use my regular zip foot actually to do this bit because the zip teeth can get in the way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start slightly down from the edge of that stitching that's already there, I'm going to make sure that my needle is aligned so it's in the same place as that stitching. Back stitching, and I'm just going to stitch this gap closed, keeping the zip tape out the way. So I've now closed the gap between my zip and my hair and my seam. So my next step is I'm going to finish off the neckline, and this isn't in the instructions of the pattern, but I want to hide this raw edge. So what I'm going to do is undo the zip, and then I'm going to take the facing, I'm going to tuck the zip tape out of the way, take the facing and pin it right sides together, the fabric, the dress and the facing, and basically capture that zip tape inside. And all I'm going to do is just stitch along from the top down to the finished edge of the facing. And when I turn that out, I then have a nice neat edge like that. So I'm going to do that on the other side, and then I'm going to top stitch my neckline down. Got my lovely model here. This is my mum.
Hello.
Hello. And that's because we're on to the final stage now. I'm going to do the hem, but I want to check the length on her, make sure it all fits, it's all looking good. Give it a little twirl, everything's done. So I talk to my model and I say, what length would you like it?
Just on my knee, please.
Okay, so when I hem it, I'm going to fold up by 2 centimetres and press that, and then I'm going to fold up by another 2 centimetres, and then I'm going to stitch, because that's quite nice then, because then I've encapsulated the raw edge. So that's going to be my last step. Thank you all very much for sewing along with me. I hope you found it helpful, and I hope the customer is happy with her new dress.
I'm very happy.